We give you our best 3 bets for week 1 of college football, and we tell you how you can take home a piece of $500 with your own best bets. And it all starts right now. What's up, Grandstand Bettors family? We're back with our weekly college football plays here for week number 1, and we're coming off a great win last week in week 0 with our Nebraska Northwestern over, starting the season 1-0 on our free picks. Now, our college football best bet leaderboard challenge is also back this season, where you could take home a piece of $500. Now, we're going to get into that in just a little bit, but first, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our college football picks all season long, and smash that like button if you are ready for a full Saturday of college football. I know we are. So without further ado, let's dive into our 3 best bets here for week number 1. And with our first bet, we're going to look at the Georgia Bulldogs versus Oregon Ducks. Kickoff for this one at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Georgia is favored by 17 points, and the over-under is at 53. Now, the Georgia Bulldogs, they're coming off an incredible season last year. A win in the SEC Championship would have just made with one of their program's greatest seasons of all time, but they still pulled off 14-1 and brought home that college football championship trophy for the first time since 1980. This team is still loaded with a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and they still have their quarterback, Stetson Bennett, who threw for almost 3,000 yards last season, 29 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions. Now, he was only sacked 14 times all season, which just shows you how good that offensive line for the Bulldogs was. Now, their starting running back, James Cook, and backup Zamir White entered the NFL draft this season, which does leave a big hole for them in the run game behind that offensive line that might not be able to reach the standard that unit did last season. This is most likely going to translate into Bennett having to throw the ball a little more, but that should not be a problem, as they probably have the best tight end in the country, Brock Bowers, and several other 5-star receivers that can cause a lot of problems for secondaries. On a side note, really though, we're a little biased. We think Michael Mayers out of Notre Dame is the best tight end in the country, but we digress. Remember, the Bulldogs offense, they averaged 443 yards and 38 points per game last season, so they definitely still know how to move the ball down the field. Now, the Oregon Ducks, they're coming off a relatively disappointing season last year. After beating number 3 ranked Ohio State in Columbus, they lost to Stanford and Utah later in the season and eventually lost their bowl game to the Sooners. Now, their offense, very up and down last season, and a lot of that can be attributed to their quarterback, Anthony Brown. With him out of the picture this season, the Ducks are going to be looking to Auburn transfer Bo Nix or sophomore Ty Thompson to lead this offense this season. Now, with Oregon's new offensive coordinator having spent time with Nix in Auburn, we think most likely that he is going to start this season, but certainly he also does have a track record of having up and down performances as well. Now, with some relatively new running backs to pick from this season and a young wide receiver core and a deep tight end room, it's going to be interesting to see how this offense does in week number 1. Georgia certainly has the talent there to put together a unit to make a run for the college football playoffs this season. Defensively, the Ducks had a very balanced unit last season, but their strength is certainly their front 7. It's going to be a very good test for this Georgia offensive line in week number 1, and with their ability to shut down the run, that should give them more resources to focus on defending that Bulldogs passing attack. Now, behind Noah Sewell, who has maybe a chance to be the best linebacker in the country, and Bennett Williams returning at safety, they certainly have the leaders on that side of the ball to help this team achieve a lot more than the Oregon Ducks did last season. With the Bulldogs' former defensive coordinator, Dan Lanning, leading the Ducks this season, they should certainly give the Ducks a little bit of an edge offensively as he tries to prove something against his former team. Now, Bo Nix is also no stranger to this Bulldogs team, and Georgia lost a lot of guys on their defense to the NFL last season. After seeing a better Georgia team last season only beat Clemson 10-3 in that season opener, we have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to cover the 17-point spread against the Ducks, a team who's out to prove something. So with our first pick in week number 1, we're going to take the Oregon Ducks plus 17 over the Georgia Bulldogs. Now with our second pick in week number 1, we're going to look at another matchup in the 3:30 p.m. Eastern time slot with the Cincinnati Bearcats and the Arkansas Razorbacks. Arkansas is favored at the moment at 6.5 points, and the over-under is set at 52. Now, Cincinnati finally got into the college football playoffs last year, and what everyone thought would happen, happened. Alabama had no problem shutting down their level of offense as they only put up 6 points in that game, and their defense really struggled to defend an SEC offense. Now, during the season in 2021, the Bearcats, they did average 36.9 points per game, which was 11th in college football. But the main reason for this was their quarterback, Desmond Ridder. With him now being a backup in Atlanta with the Falcons, that's going to be a huge role to fill for this team. Now, right now, there is tight competition between Eastern Michigan transfer Ben Bryant and recruit Evan Prater to take over the quarterback position. Both these guys look like flashy players with a lot of solid playmaking abilities, but a little behind what Ridder did for this team over the past 2 seasons. The key to this offense, though, is going to be that offensive line. They're returning all 5 starters this season, which should give them and their new quarterback good time in the pocket. With a solid tight end and a lot of quick wide receivers, they should be able to move the ball down the field a few times, but it's going to be tough seeing this offense put up the numbers like they did last season against the Razorbacks defense in week number 1. Defensively, the Bearcats, they lost 6 starters to the NFL. The defensive line should remain somewhat intact, but that secondary must replace Gardner, Kobe Bryant, and Brian Cook. This is going to be a tough thing to do, and if they can't stop the Razorbacks' rushing attack early, it's going to be a long day for their secondary. And speaking of Arkansas, they finished the season last year 9-4, including a bowl win against Penn State. The 2 best parts of this team last season was their defense and their run game. The good thing for them is that both of these components remain intact this season, so they're in great position to maybe shake things up here in the SEC. Defensively, the Razorbacks were one of the best teams in college football at stopping opponents on 3rd down last season. They have a solid front 7, and their secondary only gave up 215 passing yards per game while tallying 13 interceptions. Now, that defense ended up allowing 400 yards just 4 times last season, giving up that many or more 8 times in 2020 and 9 times in 2019. They have made some big strides, improvements here since those years, and it looks like they're in good position to do the same thing this season. Now, their offense, it's going to be led by a big offensive line and quarterback KJ Jefferson. The Hogs lead the SEC in rushing last season, had the 10th most efficient passing game in the country, and they averaged 442 yards and 31 points per game overall. Now, those stats were almost up to par with Alabama and Georgia, and with really minimal losses to their offense since last season. Like their defense, this offensive unit has a lot of upsides this season. As we mentioned earlier, we saw how Cincinnati played against SEC opponents last season. Granted, it was Alabama, but it is clear that there is a big talent gap, and that has only gotten bigger with the departure of Ridder, Gardner, Bryant, and top receiver Alex Pierce for the Bearcats. The Razorbacks, on the other hand, have had a solid season last year, and with only wide receiver Treylon Burks being the only major departure, they should be able to build nicely on what they accomplished last season. Now, that starts in week 1 with their matchup against the Bearcats, and unfortunately for the Bearcats, it is on Arkansas's home turf. With the spread just under a touchdown right now, we see the gap between these 2 teams a little greater than that. So, with our second pick for week number 1, we're going to take Arkansas minus 6.5 over Cincinnati. That brings us to our main event for week number 1, my Notre Dame Fighting Irish against the hated Ohio State Buckeyes in primetime at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Ohio State 17.5 point favorite in this one, and the over-under is set at 59. Notre Dame was one win away last season from making it to the college football playoffs. They lost to Cincinnati in the beginning of October, and it did make it very hard for them to make the playoffs despite winning 11 games last season. Now, by the end of last season, they also lost their coach Brian Kelly as he left to take that LSU job. And defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman got the call up as new head coach, and things looked very good for him in his first half of coaching their bowl game against Oklahoma State. But they were outscored 23-7 in the second half, and Notre Dame fans questioned all summer if that was the right coaching decision. Now, with quarterback Jack Cohn thankfully gone, the Irish are going to be led by a combination of Tyler Buckner's run-pass option and Drew Pine's throwing ability. In either scenario, though, both of these quarterbacks can create plays, but they're going to need their offensive line to play like they did in the second half of last season if they're going to have any success this season. They also lost a huge part of their offense, two-time 1,000-yard rusher Kyron Williams. It's going to be tough replacing him in the backfield, so the Irish are going to have to rely on guys more like Michael Mayer and wide receivers Avery Davis and Lorenzo Styles to move the ball down the field. On the defensive side of things, they also lost in their secondary, Kyle Hamilton to the Ravens. The secondary is going to struggle without him. Their cornerbacks rarely matched up well with wide receivers last season. And with that big hole to fill, C.J. Stroud, in our opinion, is going to have a field day in this season opener. And speaking of C.J. Stroud and the Buckeyes, that guy put up some ridiculous numbers last year. He threw for over 4,400 passing yards with a 71% completion percentage and 44 touchdowns with only 6 interceptions. Ohio State, though, to our delight, and you're going to see it on our face here, suffered a devastating loss to the Wolverines, which resulted in them missing the Big Ten championship and the college football playoffs for the first time over the last 3 seasons. Now, they also lost a couple good wideouts in Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, but their leading receiver, Jackson Smith Njigma, who had over 1,600 receiving yards last season, is returning, and that will be Stroud's go-to target along with some other top recruits they brought in. In addition, running back Travion Henderson's coming off a great season, rushing for over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. This is going to be one of the best offenses again in college football after they put up 561 yards per game and 45.7 points per game in 2021. Where the Buckeyes struggled last season, though, was on the defensive side of the ball. They gave up 31 points to Minnesota in their season opener, 35 to Oregon the following week, and 42 in the loss to Michigan. They did rank in the top 5 in the Big Ten in sacks and interceptions, but they were 9th in points allowed per game with 22.8 and struggled to defend both the pass and run at times during the season. In fairness, though, to the Buckeyes, they have had a lot of players enter the NFL recently. They just haven't been able to fill the spots with the same talent. Now, with how poorly the Ohio State defense played last season, the Irish are going to be attacking them early, trying to prove something to new head coach Marcus Freeman in his first regular season game. On the other side of the ball, Ohio State has one of the best offenses in college football and should have no problem putting up points against this Notre Dame defense. We think both offenses in this game take advantages of both defenses, and with our third pick of week number 1, we're going to take Ohio State and Notre Dame to go over 59 points, but also go Irish. Now, before we sign off, we have to let you know how you can participate in our college football best bet leaderboard challenge. It is very simple. Every week, our college football free pick video will drop on Friday nights. In the comment section of those videos, you can put 3 of your best bets from that week. Now, there are a few rules to follow, which can be found in that pinned comment below. The top 3 people at the end of the season will take home a slice of $500. It's as easy as that. So, go read the rules and start putting those bets in today. That's it for us here at Grandstand Bettors. As always, sit back, relax, enjoy week 1. Week 1 of college football. We are back, baby. We'll see you next week with our week 2 free picks.